Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everything EV podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Atkinson, and in each episode we'll be discussing everything to do with electric travel. So whether it be cars, bikes, boats, or even planes, we'll have it covered. In these episodes, you can expect us to be joined by people from within the industry to give us their thoughts on the EV space, and we'll also be bringing you other features such as electric car reviews, electric motorsport coverage, and much, much more along the way. This podcast is available on all streaming platforms, so be sure to subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts from to make sure you get every episode as soon as it's released. In this episode, we're joined by James Cameron, the CEO and founder of Mission Motorsport, the Forces Motorsport charity which aims to help those affected by military operations by engagement through sport. James is joining us on this podcast to discuss Mission Motorsport's recent Hypermile record of travelling 475 miles in a Renault Zoe at the UK's fastest circuit in Thruxton. Along with James, we're also joined by Gunnlauger, Erlendsson of Enso Tyres, which were fitted onto the Renault Zoe to help extend its driving range and ultimately break the record. We're delighted to have them both on the podcast, and now James. First and foremost, it's been a couple of weeks now since you broke the record. How does it feel now looking back?
Still exhausting. It's I think it's been really wonderful, and it's interesting how it's kind of changed the way that we've changed the way that a group of kind of petrol heads think about certainly about EVs, but just how engaged a population of our guys and our audience has been as a result of, it's always lovely to have a crack at an existing record, and particularly, a French record that stood for some time like that, is good to have but I think the thing that perhaps only G really knew was just how much further we'd be able to raise the bar beyond what we thought we'd be able to have a good crack at with the French. And for those who don't know, we ran two cars. So one was absolutely standard UK car as it had come directly from the supplying dealer, run on the standard tires that a Zoe comes on, which is sort of really well understood. And our target for that car was 410 miles, because if we did that, it meant we had beaten the economy figures that the French achieved of, incredible 7.9 miles per kilowatt hour. If we got over that, we knew we were into the eights, and that would be really special. And we managed that, 424 miles on the standard car. But it was the other one. I'd probably let G take over at that point to talk about just how far that thing went, that just dazzled us.
Yes, so we of course equipped the second car with our ultra energy efficient range extending tires that Enso is developing in partnership with leading car makers and also large EV fleets to basically reduce the amount of energy per mile. And we achieved an additional 0.7 miles, I believe, or thereabouts, on top of what the standard car did, which is a difference of over 11% more EV range. And to put that into context, that gave us an energy consumption figures on a per mile basis of 9.1 miles per kilowatt. That is an outrageously high average compared to what people see often when they drive their car around. Of course, partly it was due to the great team at Mission Motorsport and also our friendly Hypermiler, Kevin, who helped us train for this. Part of it was also learning the track as we drove around Thruxton, which is, as you know, fastest track in the UK, and therefore now should be the most efficient as well. And partly, of course, this was very, very much depending on the weather as well as the tires. So when we started, we started with different energy figures, and of course these settled down over time as we drove during the day and also during the night. But we also learned a lot. I think the summary of both Enso's experience of having done this as Mission Motorsport is that we could definitely crack on and get even better figures in the future. But having broken the record with such great numbers was an absolute godsend and an absolutely fantastic result.
Yeah, just on the subject of the tyres themselves, can you talk to us about the technology behind them and how just through the tyres you're able to extend the range of an EV to a point where you can set this kind of record?
Absolutely. So part of it is in the tire construction of how we use higher grade raw materials to reduce the weight of the tire while not sacrificing anything like wet grip or the durability. So the tire performs overall as good as the standard tires, except in the area, of course, of the energy efficiency, where we punch way above our weight. But this is basically derived from being laser focused on the needs for electric vehicles, because Enso is only developing tires, of course, for EVs. And because of that focus, we can basically say to ourselves, look, let's find the optimal solution for this particular car and the use cycle. I should also mention, of course, that the average speeds we achieved was 19 miles an hour. And to put that is still faster than the average speed in outer London. That is double the average speed in inner London. So these numbers are not entirely fictitious or out of context with the real world result. But of course, we got optimal solutions in terms of being able to drive the vehicle around for 2 hours at a time, which of course helped us drive those numbers up.
And I mean, Charlie, I should probably stress at this point, I mean, obviously it's a military charity that's running it, where our background is in motorsport and helping people into jobs after the military. We're a Royal Foundation initiative. So, we get some amazing support from the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. We've also got the rest of the world looking in at us as we're making it really public. Hey guys, come and have a look at what we're doing. So we were so careful in order to make sure that the integrity of the attempt was absolutely spot on. So the two cars were supplied identical. We benchmarked the two of them against each other, and we picked the worst one of the two to be fitted with the Enso tires in order to go for that. So there has been a tiny bit of a scratching our heads afterwards, going, I wonder if we'd have picked the other car, would 500 have been achievable? I mean, this is the talk of madmen, though. I mean, when you work out just how efficient it is and use any metric to read that across into sort of mile per gallon equivalents, we're well into the 300 mile per gallon kind of range, which, these were not cars that were streamliners that had weight taken out of them. These were factory spec Zoes with no changes to them whatsoever, running the standard tire pressures as per the manufacturer's recommendations, without the geometry tweaked in any way other than to make sure it's exactly where it's supposed to be for that spec of car. So, I mean, in terms of how realistic is it as a record? Well, it was a record, so of course it wasn't realistic. And do you know, I found this out horribly about 2 days later, because one of the very specific photos of that efficiency that was achieved, we hadn't photographed from inside the car. We had every other photograph of every other thing. So somebody said, look, can you pop along and just go and get that? Oh my God, it's difficult to drive the car so that you can replicate those kind of numbers. It is barking levels of efficiency, but it's just been achieved with real precision. And we've learned so much. We just a mountain of data that came out of the end of it. Really fascinating, though, to be able to look and go, look, we've controlled everything. They were driven in the same temperatures and the same conditions. They're two benchmark cars against each other. We've even got the same driver team, because there wasn't a separate driver team for one car and the other. Everybody drove both vehicles. So the comparisons that we draw just by virtue of having changed the tires is just extraordinary. And I think that's been an eye-opener for absolutely everybody. And the only man who had an inkling of this, just how impressive it was going to be beforehand, was G, who played it very cool, played his cards close to his chest, and gave us free rein to be able to properly, run them to see what they would actually do. And extraordinary returning a number like that at the end of the day.
Did the record exceed your expectations, G?
To some extent, yes. I think the net record did. We were not absolutely certain where we would be. I mean, we would know where we were roughly in comparison to the benchmark tire, from this other French branded tire. Of course, how it would then be translated onto the road, onto Thruxton, onto the team, onto the weather was the question. We didn't know we would hit 475. We knew roughly how we would compare against the benchmark, but you have so many variables that can impact on you. And for example, the weather, clearly, you know, we clearly saw when we were driving in the mist and the fog that the energy figures were far lower. But flipping up to when the weather was sunny and the rides was good, we were seeing numbers above 10 miles per kilowatt. And to go into double digits is almost like reaching some sort of mystical nirvana land of the EV community, because nobody gets double digits on any tire and on any EV pretty much out there. And we did. Enso did it with factory standard vehicle with our tires on it. And so achieving 10.5 miles per kilowatt on a 52 kilowatt battery means that, you know, in the optimal scenario, we would have broken 500 miles, more than 800 kilometers, which is double what the WLTP official range of that car is. So put that into context, is that, you know, if you can double the stated manufacturer range, you're often on a good winner.
Perfect. And now, James, you touched on this earlier, and you said that it's actually quite difficult to drive a car in such a specific way that allows you to break this kind of record. Can you talk to us about the drivers and the level of skill that's needed to reach these sorts of numbers?
No, absolutely. And I think the first thing we did was we imported a load of expertise in order to show us how to do it. I mean, Thruxton we're incredibly familiar with. It's where we do a lot of our race driver training, and we know the place really well. But what we had to do was bring in some real hypermile specialities into it. And Kevin Booker, with his background, long EV ownership, shortly due to go and attempt a record. But alongside another friend of the charity, who's a guy called Paul Clifton, BBC transport correspondent for the south of England, who's been doing stuff in hypermiling for an awfully long time now. The joy of it for me was then putting some of our audience alongside that as well. So you've got a mixture of veterans of different vintages, sort of, you know, pre-Afghan era, Tristan, you know, with his background, particularly in Northern Ireland tours, through that sort of Afghan era of veterans, and a bunch of people who society would tell us are facing some significant challenges. But we know these guys and girls well enough actually to know what can be got out of them. And you've got a variety of experience there, from, you know, Matt Stringer, who's gone and raced in some extraordinary things, both with his race license, through to the likes of Linda and Tris, who headlined the Autosport show doing precision driving displays in rear-wheel drive cars at high speed, with a band of the Irish Guards standing in between them as they do a 120 mile an hour crossover. So do I trust them to go around Thruxton at 20 miles an hour? Yes, absolutely. But I think it was a very new discipline for the hypermilers, who are much more used to doing it on the public road, where it's much more about anticipating traffic conditions, route selection, all of the rest of it. On the track, it is about absolute millimetric precision, both in terms of where you are on the track, but also the speed that you're hitting at the time, the mode the car's in. And for us, there was a lot of learning about the cars too, because if you just set 19 miles an hour in on your cruise control and steered, it was possible to get yourself around a lap like that. But your economy would be nearly a third worse as a result of it. So loads and loads of work in the training done earlier in order to work out, okay, so what are the optimum speeds? And then how do you kind of breathe around the track? So how do you allow the car to either gain in speed, or how do you harvest energy on the very slight downhills that are there? And how do you carry speed up the hills in order to be able to just keep yourself going and regain the speed when conditions are more favorable? And funnily enough, it depended on a variety of things, including wind direction and stuff like that, change the way in which you drove around the lap. But the last thing you want to be doing is stopping. So you want to have as few standstills as possible for the car to come to. So you're also talking about long stints, and that combination of requirement for massive precision shoe off, driving with a toe, literally, just being incredibly careful about the way in which power's put into the car. Just requires incredible concentration, but then over duration as well, for them to be able to do that lap after lap after lap. But I was kind of confident in that because I know what they've got in them. So the team that did it, I think, kind of dazzled everybody with just how good they were. And for us, it's fantastic, to have veterans being able to do something like that, to be able to have, sort of mums, spouses coming onto the team as well, and indeed doing as well as they did is really wonderful as we sort of talk about this population of people who've got extraordinary quality and a lot to offer. It was a showcase for the tyres, but I guess it was also a showcase too for the sort of humanity on display, and that really resonated with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I was just wondering if we could touch on Mission Motorsport in general and the work it does, and as well why setting this record was so important for the work you do. And G as well, why was it so important for you guys to be involved in all of this?
Sure. So, I mean, Mission Motorsport was first formed nearly 10 years ago. So in 2012, as the Forces Motorsport charity, it was designed to help deliver one of the arms of recovery sport that's made available to those who are leaving the services wounded, injured or sick. But that race, retrain, recover mantra that sits underneath the charity's logo has been there since the outset. And it's all about using sport as a tool to get people off the sofa, to get them engaged and to help them into substantive and rewarding careers after the military. So sort of famously, we run Jaguar Land Rover's Armed Forces Engagement Scheme, but we also look after a lot of other companies as well through the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, where we run their Mission Automotive initiative. That's just been picked up. I think we're a finalist in the Soldiering On Awards this year, which is a really rather lovely thing. But SMMT as a governing body an industry body that scales a huge broad cross-section of British industry, to reach out to that membership has been absolutely fantastic. And we've met all sorts of companies through it, many of whom we're now helping with our own armed forces engagement piece, which in turn benefits our audience of veterans and their families. But Enso was one of those rather more unusual ones. Here's a new, exciting tech startup getting some help and some leg up. And at which point, it was our first sort of meeting with G. And what he was talking about just resonated on a sort of fundamental level. That Enso mantra of being able to do things better, to be able to do things with greater economy, but at much less of a cost to the planet, was something that truly resonated with us. And, I think G's probably best placed now to pick up why on earth we thought we'd take that forward.
Yeah, so we were really happy last year when we joined and supported Mission Motorsport for the first year, and this will continue. And ultimately, what are we doing and what is Enso about is that we're addressing basically the biggest, dirtiest secret of the automotive industry, which is that tires are extremely carbon emission heavy. They create a lot of air pollution. They create a lot of microplastic pollution in our oceans and mountains of waste every year. So Enso's basically tackled to that big challenge to develop better tires, in particular for EVs. And the reason we target EVs is principally because electric vehicles are heavier and they have higher torque. So they tend to wear out tires even faster than normal cars do. And so our mantra is that if we're going to live in a future full of EVs, we're going to have, unless we deal with the tire, we're going to end up with a future full of microplastic and air pollution, even though we may have solved some of the tailpipe problems. So ultimately, we're developing more energy efficient, more durable and more sustainable tires for EVs, and we're working with large car makers and large EV fleets. So this, of course, is our ability to showcase the technology, to showcase where we are at the current stage of the development of our company and where the direction is going. We actually launched this race alongside the launch of our crowdfunding campaign on Crowdcube, where we basically are inviting the EV community and clean tech investors to invest alongside us. because we secured recently some funding from the UK government. And this basically brings individuals investing from £10 of their own money just to be part of the Enso journey and the Enso story, proving that we can go further, if we do it together. And that's what the beauty, I think, from this program and from the Hypermiling was, that we showed clearly that us and Mission Motorsport could do that.
Just off the back of that, where you mentioned the EV industry and going further, obviously you said before that this record almost doubled the official range of a Renault Zoe. What do you think this record says to those critics and skeptics of electric vehicles that still exist?
Both of us are looking at each other going, who wants to take that one on first? I mean, these are all steps in the right direction. All of the barriers to EV adoption are being addressed on every level. And one of the huge pieces, of course, is around charging infrastructure. And when people feel that there is the charging infrastructure in place for them to be able to do it, it will remove a huge amount of the anxiety. But the other side of that coin is range. And it's the first thing that people talk about when they talk about EVs. People always have a unrealistic expectation and assumption about how far they drive without brakes and all of the rest of it, which when you actually pull it apart, you tend to find is an awful lot less. And for us to go out and set ridiculous numbers, 475 miles is a preposterous number. This is a French record that could have landed at Dover and ended up north of Edinburgh, delivering it to the Queen at Balmoral on a single charge in a Renault Zoe. This is not a streamlined, weird, different-looking car. These are mainstream things which are out there, available from the dealers, and theoretically is within the grasp of everybody. And if we can start people to just start to see things in the art of the possible, as opposed to starting to see the problems, then you get them behind the wheel, and with that experience breaks down a lot of those barriers. And for people to see that not only is purchasing an EV a valid choice for them from lifestyle reasons as well, but when there's things like Enso Tyres that are addressing some of the other issues that are absolutely out there around EVs, need to be taken on head on, then these are ways that they can see for the future of the industry, is that this is the way in which we all need to handle. And it's one of the reasons why crowdfunding is so exciting. Great to have government money going in through the Future Fund as well, but this is something that people can be part of too. This is a movement. Let's make the world a bit of a better place. And I think the vision that G and his team have shown for this has just been wonderful. And and where it's inspiring us and our audience as well, then that's a cool thing. If it's lifting our beneficiary audience too, then we're absolutely delighted.
I can only second that. I mean, the whole principle of Enso is basically to show that together we can go further than you possibly think. And that, of course, is not just the range, but also in terms of reducing the other effects of tires on our planet. But we work with, Mission Motorsport really closely. This was a fantastic first stab of this. And we'd like to eventually plan to do it again. So we'll, stay tuned if we can figure out how to do it. But the ultimately for us is, if we can show that people can drive their EVs efficiently and go further, it will only increase the adoption of EVs. And ultimately, I want to add one thing, is that the vehicles we used were the standard base versions of the Renault Zoe. They were not like the ones that cost you an additional here or with the added options. We took the base standard, one of the most common electric vehicles on this planet, and we drove it almost twice than the manufacturer told us we could. And Renault was also very supportive as well. We should probably mention them in this journey. So ultimately, it's about collaboration. It's about moving ourselves forward as a planet, as people, and as a community. And so if you want to join Enso, you can now put in your £10. But even if you're just there to support us in a wider context, we welcome you.
Okay, perfect. That was almost the perfect segue into my final question. Obviously, you said we'll see what happens in the future. So what are the next steps for you guys? Have you got your eyes set on any other records at all?
Well, as ever, there's great ideas lead to other things. So one of the things that's been fascinating for us, and particularly I think for me and my background in motorsport, is seeing how British motorsport is adapting to the challenges of high voltages finding their way onto circuits. Now, of course, Formula E has been with us for some time on some of the premier circuits and off around the world doing its thing that we will get to see on TV. But I think there's a piece of work to be done for the other circuits to be able to help them with these new technologies. And it's not just in the motorsport at the weekend, it's in what they're doing during the week that makes them financially viable. Of course, these are the vehicles that manufacturers are keen to show off. And so helping deliver the first ever Institute of the Motor Industry training package for circuits is one of our next pieces of work that we'll roll out at Thruxton, Croft and Pembrey in July. Before then, that then goes out to a bunch of other circuits. We're also working with a group of EV owners who are working really hard at being able to get their road standard EVs and participate in British motorsport. And at the moment, that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. So we're working with Motorsport UK, the sports governing body, in order to look at how that can be feasible. But we're also having a look at going, well, all right, so the Mission Motorsport team in a Zoe did kind of well, round Thruxton, control conditions. And lots of people have sort of gone, that's really interesting what you did. How could we get to have a go? So there may well be a watch this space. Wouldn't it be interesting if we could do an EV hypermiling challenge that you then run the slowest race in the world, or Mission Motorsport Ranges? That might be a nice moniker for it. If only we knew a range conducting officer somewhere who could run that for us, then this would be, something really cool. And for anybody to be able to go, come on, let's go and take the thing off the driveway and we'll go and compete. And if you're competing against your performance against WLTP, then it levels the playing field. It doesn't matter whether you turn up in a Tesla Model 3 or a Nissan Leaf or anything else in between. You can go and compete against others in the same sort of car or against WLTP, because isn't that a nice thing to beat?
I completely agree with that. I mean, the world running the world's slowest race circuit would be a lot of fun, and invite people to come, with their family cars and break it. You probably need to bring about 4 or 5 drivers, by the way, because of sheer exhaustion. But if people brought together teams and their own vehicles, that would be an amazing experience. In terms of your other question, like what's next? I mean, I would love us to break 500, because that would double on the WLTP of 245. It would also get us above 800 kilometers, which is a really big round number in that space. But we also have to think about kind of like the future. Currently, one of the biggest records that is currently out there is nobody has ever driven a Tesla more than 1,000 miles. And the numbers are still lower than that. I think that potentially within the 12 months or thereabouts, we would like to have a stab at trying to make a Tesla go above 1,000 miles. And if that would happen, we're talking here about an absolutely historic number on a production EV. Tesla, of course, is bringing out new vehicles. That there are some issues still about the Tyres energy efficiency that we need to tackle. But that's a big record. But if we could do 500 on a Zoe, we should be able to do 1,000 on a Tesla.
That's all for this episode, and a very big thank you to James and G for coming on to talk about their amazing work. This episode and all other episodes of the Everything EV podcast are available on all streaming platforms, so be sure to subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts from to make sure you get every episode as soon as it's released. For daily news coverage, features and much more, head over to evpowered.co.uk. Thanks once again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Everything EV podcast.